Today, I'm showing you the making of a melodic techno track on the MPC Live III. I'm going to play through the song first and then walk you through it. This song, like pretty much every other MPC Live III beat I've made so far, started on the couch, and I kind of developed it into the basic skeleton of the track in kind of a marathon session, and then have worked on it in pieces since. I did do something I don't normally do, which is use a bass loop, but it's a tiny little portion, so I figure that's okay, and you'll see what I mean in a second. I also, though, want to mention for my MPC-1 heads, basically nothing about my process was different from what I would have done on the MPC-1, other than sitting on the couch and using the step sequencer. Everything else is pretty much exactly the same. I also want to mention that the version of the song you just heard is the exact output of the arranger. So I performed it into the arranger on camera, which you just saw, and then exported it to audio mixdown, and then mastered that in Ozone in my DAW. But like, I didn't do any mixing in post. That's just what came out of here. I wanted to mention that. I wanted to see if I could do as much as possible just on the device itself, and I'm pretty happy with the result. So let's go into the clips and take a look at that bass loop that I mentioned at the beginning. So this started, like many a track, with just me loading in a bunch of sounds that seem like they might go together, and then throwing stuff around, seeing if I can come up with something. So I just started with a really boring foundation, and then pretty much immediately started building rhythm on top of it. So this kick is hitting the note E, and then this bass loop, I just took out a small portion. I loaded this in because I wanted to extract just one of those bass one-shots, but I was going to make a rolling bass line anyway, and so I figured using this as is fine. I'm going to jump ahead slightly. I'm going to get into the cue links in a bit more depth in a bit, but I want to mention in the filter envelope, I don't actually have the envelope doing anything. I just have the filter and a macro with a preset range for the filter cutoff. So I can raise that in the intro of the song and then drop it in the outro. So far, so simple. So I have a couple of little sound effects or percussion elements here. This one is something that I got from like a lo-fi pack, and this is going to start to become a very obvious trend. Here's the dry sound. Got some Reverb Pro on that. And then some EQ to like tame that harsh peak. This sound, very like in your face. So a synced delay, and then a just standard reverb make this a lot more pleasant. I also have a second page of sounds with yet more elements. This is a good time to bring in two things. First of all, the kind of formula I use for these hocketed, like very percussion and synth stab heavy drops. The kind of overall formula I find myself returning to over and over again is like a kind of blast of sound, some sort of bois. So let me jump forward a little bit. Some kind of blast of sound, a couple of sound effects, another blast of sound halfway through, so some other kind of bois or stab element, and then some sort of little turnaround, preferably with a synth or vocal element leading back up into a new repetition. So the second thing I want to introduce is another plugin, and I, full disclosure, got this sent to me by Akai, and I've really been vibing on it lately. So this right here is Air Ether, and it's really fun. So here's the original sound. This is like one of the fairly default presets, if I recall correctly. I haven't done a super deep dive into wrangling every element of it, but I've had a lot of fun messing up sounds and also creating ambient washes of sound with this. So it's got a reverb, a delay, some modulation options and compression and pitch messy uppy options, plus some like basic width and mix options. It makes a lot of sounds a lot more interesting. So my favorite version of this in this song is this. So here's without. And it's got that like slowly speed changing LFO, which is just an instant cheat code to making something sound cool. And This plugin overall is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this song. Another example is this bass stab. It's got this wash of reverb that kicks in afterwards. So let me get rid of everything. So pretty simple. And then I'm bouncing this filter around a bit via step automation. And then if I go back into the effects and turn on just ether, you hear how it's got that swell that hits after the bass note. And then I'm cleaning up, well, especially the low end, quite a bit. I also have some sounds with nothing or at least very little going on in terms of effects. For instance, this sample from Synplant that I made, this clap, and I should mention the obligatory thing that I always mention with pre-shifted claps like this. I have this shifted to hit a bit early. So if you go to the grid and select this sound and turn on Don't Snap, I can like nudge it to hit just a little bit early. And that works a lot better than if it hit just right on the same grid as the kick. You can hear it sounds like it's hitting late because it is, but this way, it's a lot more pleasant. I also have some basic elements like this that just have the bog standard reverb. Pretty simple. And then 2 sounds from my $5 sample pack, linked in the description. So a shaker, and let me go to the drum sequencer here. And basically for programming this, what I do is just punch in a bunch of notes on the step sequencer, and then you can hold down each step and set the velocity. And so I just kind of have it do this pattern here where it rises up on the 3rd step, it's at its maximum and then goes back down. And then it's being accented by this little 909 style hi-hat. Later on, I also bring in, and let me just show you that here, a ride cymbal. And this has got a little reverb on it, and that's about it. And so I've just got this hitting 4 on the floor. And that raises the energy level up a notch. Same deal with a 909 open hi-hat. So one more element I want to introduce is this guy. So this is kind of fun. This is another use of the Ether plugin. So this is what the sound was like originally. Also from my $5 sample pack. So this introduces some phase issues and doesn't always sound the nicest, but in the render I got, it sounded pretty good. So I rolled with it. In my opinion, this makes the sound a lot more interesting, despite how wonky it sounds, or in fact, in some ways because of it. So then I'm just boosting a little bit of high end and cutting some lows and ducking it to the kick a bit. So if I recall correctly, I actually started with that groove and then started building all of the other percussion and synth one-shot stuff around it. And now I've got like a full loop with a pretty well-established groove that I can start to build on top of. That's kind of the methodology I've been using for these. So let's bring in a synth. This is a really nice sound. And this is using the plugin Iona, which, full disclosure, Akai also sent to me, but I asked them to. This is one of my new favorites. It took a while to grow on me, but I'm really vibing with it lately, especially for stuff like this. And I do have another macro set up on my Q links to raise the filter cutoff and only the filter cutoff within specified bounds. And I'll show you that like right after I show you what this sounds like if I raise the filter cutoff. So you can see this go up. God, I love this sound. And in this case, I do have the built-in ARP doing its thing. So let's talk about the custom Q links. And if I recall correctly, this used to only be available on the Akai Force until it was brought onto the MPCs. And I want to mention you can do this on the other standalone MPCs as well, with one caveat that I'll get to later. So if I hold down the Q link button, I can set what the Q links control. And so in this case, I've got Project 2, which is my custom Q links. And if I go to Q link edit, I can edit what those parameters are. So the nice thing you can do is set a range for your parameters, and you can have a bunch of parameters controlled by one single knob if you want to. In this case, I only have one parameter per knob because that's all I needed, but you can go ham on this if you want to. The thing that I really like about this is the set range, because I don't want to have to worry that like, oops, I dipped the filter cutoff too low and now you can't really hear the synth, or I brought it up too high and now it's all harsh and gross. This, like, if it's all the way down, I know that it is kind of at its default state. And then if it's all the way up, it's as aggressive as it will ever get. As I'm performing this into the arranger, I can kind of watch where I'm at on the knob position and say, raise this all the way smoothly over the course of 8 bars. Same deal for the filter cutoff for the bass sample. I can also know exactly where I'm at and know exactly how far I want to go that I've set up deliberately in advance. And you can also flip the polarity of that, so you could have all the way to the left be a filter all the way up and all the way to the right be a filter all the way down. I mentioned there was going to be a caveat to this though. So if I go to the arranger and I'm raising this filter cutoff, right? Notice 2 things. First of all, it has visually blocked off my ability to launch scenes. And also, if I try to launch another clip, it doesn't let me. The screen has been hijacked. You can turn this off, but it means you lose useful information. But let me show you how to do that real quick. If you go into Menu, Preferences, and General, if I scroll down here, you can uncheck Show Q-Link Status when touched. So if I get rid of that, the screen is no longer hijacked, but like I said, you lose useful information. The way to get around that on the MPC Live III in particular is to use the step sequencer. So if I hold down Set and then Row Launch, these rows now correspond to these scenes here. Which means that I can twiddle these Q-Link knobs and then hit these buttons just in time to switch to a different scene. This green one is the bottom row selected that's currently playing. I can twiddle this, no problemo. And that's something you can't do on like the MPC one because it's not set up for that. On here, you can, and that's pretty nice. For the next few elements that I want to cover, let's take a look at the breakdown. And then stop all of these so you can hear these elements in isolation. So first of all, the same ARP as before. I should mention, if I go into the mixer real quick, I can show you this. It's very subtly ducked to the kick, so when the kick is not playing, it's not sidechained. Pretty simple. What I actually wanted to show you though, if I get rid of this. So this is my other favorite synth, and probably my like properly favorite synth on the MPC or in the MPC ecosystem is Jura. And this is a modified preset. And that's doing this little call and response thing with this other Jura instance. And that goes during the like full-on drop portion, and then for the breakdown and for the final iteration of the drop. And this is another instance of Iona, and there's a little bit of like modulating filter movement, and that gives this some life. And I really like this whole patchwork melody, patchwork rhythm thing I've got going on this track. That's something I really like about this style of music, and hopefully I've emulated pretty well. The final 2 things in this breakdown are this element, which is an instance of Fabric, which I don't find myself using all that often, but it came in clutch here. The tremolo's not even on, but it's got this nice shimmer thing going on here. I also forgot I have this extra little pad, and also my purple light died, so we're just going to have to deal with this. And then finally, this subtle little element in the final repetition of the breakdown. I also want to mention that for the beginning portion of this track before the breakdown, I don't have any of those pads going. But then once I introduced this like shimmery pad, I really liked it. And so post breakdown, I have it feature in the drop, which like helps raise the energy level another notch and add some texture and complexity. When I do these, I basically start off with just like a 1-bar clip with some really basic percussion, and then I'll double it and double it again for a 4-bar clip, start throwing around some sounds, double it again for an 8-bar clip, and finally end up with like my main loop. Then I'll start just like stacking stuff onto it with reckless abandon, and then eventually I can start to duplicate that clip, which you just hold down, copy, and then you can paste it somewhere else. And if I go into the grid here, if you select a sound, like for instance, this shaker, it'll select everything and you can just bink, cut it. And so I'll just carve away at this to create all my different sections and start to build up an arrangement via the scenes. So I'll like copy entire rows, I'll move stuff around, and eventually build up an arrangement. It's a little bit scattered until it isn't, so it takes a bit of like, okay, I gotta just lock in here and build up my song structure. But it's worth it because it lets me be kind of creative and free-flowing until I want to seriously start thinking about structuring out the song. As I was going through that process, I realized I wanted a build to bridge the breakdown and the kind of second drop, if you will. So I can raise the filter cutoff of this ARP as we go and then just like bring it back down for the drop. And I added another drum track just to be my kind of dedicated build and swoosh track. So this, if I stop everything, sounds like this. I forgot to mention, I also have another fabric bass in the breakdown. Just a basic little filter sweep bass. And I have then resampled this into here. And then I have that fade out to make way for a reversed version of it. As a nice lead in into that drop. And I've like added a bit of tube drive and cut some lows. I also have this just pretty basic riser sample. And I'm not going to play the whole thing, but hopefully you get the idea. And I'm just holding this down until the end of the section. Then this track is also where my white noise whoosh and vocal lead-in live, by the way. And finally for the build, the snare. And there are a couple things going on here. If I go into the sequencer, I've got a little bit of velocity manipulation. So let me turn off the filter for a second. So it starts off with a lot of difference in velocity between the snare hits. And that difference gets less and less as we go, until it becomes just this steady ba 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 as it rises. And then I've got a filter plugin that I've automated both the output gain and the cutoff frequency to rise over the course of the build. I could have built this into a macro and done it on the fly, but I didn't want to do that, and so I didn't do it. So instead, that just lives within the clip. So you can see the velocity automation here. And then I've also got the cutoff frequency and the output gain automated within the clip, and that works perfectly fine. If you'd like to see my first experience with the MPC Live III, I've got you covered up over here. And if you'd like some more MPC Techno, I've got you covered up over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.